They told her to serve coffee because she looked like someone who belonged in the kitchen, not the briefing room. No insignia, no name tape, just a quiet woman in standard battle dress uniforms carrying a notepad. But when she reached across the conference table to refill the general's cup, her sleeve pulled back just enough to expose something on her finger that made every officer in that room go silent. A ring that wasn't just jewelry. It was proof of the deadliest training program in the military. The same general who'd been ignoring her suddenly couldn't take his eyes off her hand because what he saw meant she'd survived missions that most of his colonels had only read about in classified reports. None of them noticed that their commanding general had just gone completely silent. Harrison's mind raced through everything he knew about Navy SEAL training and the women who'd attempted it over the years. The numbers were brutal. Out of thousands of candidates who started the program, only a tiny percentage made it through to graduation. And among women who'd attempted the course, the success rate was even more devastating. He could count on one hand the number of women who'd earned the right to wear that ring. "Staff Sergeant Anderson," Harrison said quietly, his voice cutting through Colonel Brooks' presentation like a knife. Harrison set his coffee cup down carefully, never taking his eyes off her face. "That's an interesting ring you're wearing." Sienna glanced down at her left hand, and Harrison saw the exact moment she realized her cover had been blown. Her expression didn't change dramatically, but there was a slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she was rapidly calculating her options and coming up short. "It was a gift, sir," she said carefully, which was technically true but completely inadequate as an explanation. Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying her with the kind of intense focus he usually reserved for enemy positions he was planning to attack. "From whom?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Everyone in the room was now staring at Sienna, waiting for an answer that would explain why their commanding general had suddenly become fascinated with a staff sergeant's jewelry. But Harrison already knew the answer, and he suspected Sienna knew that he knew. The only question now was whether she was going to continue pretending to be someone she wasn't, or if she was finally going to reveal who Staff Sergeant Sienna Anderson really was beneath that carefully constructed facade of administrative competence. "The ring was earned, sir," she said quietly. "When did you graduate, buds?" "Class 347, sir. 3 years ago." "Hell Week completed successfully, sir, along with all other phases of training." General Harrison studied her face with the kind of intense scrutiny usually reserved for enemy combatants during interrogation. "What's your actual assignment here?" "Staff Sergeant." Sienna hesitated for just a moment, calculating how much she could reveal without compromising operational security or her current mission parameters. The truth was complicated, involving classified medical issues and ongoing investigations that she wasn't authorized to discuss with anyone below a certain clearance level. "Recovery assignment, sir. Temporary administrative duty while awaiting reassignment to operational status." It was the sanitized version of the truth, stripped of all the details that would have required security briefings and classified documentation. But it was accurate enough to satisfy Harrison's immediate questions, without revealing information that could compromise ongoing operations. General Harrison leaned forward in his chair, his coffee forgotten as he processed what Sienna had just revealed. Recovery assignment meant she'd been wounded in action, probably seriously enough to require extended rehabilitation. Temporary administrative duty was military code for keeping valuable personnel safe while they healed from things that couldn't be discussed in polite company. "What was your last operational assignment?" Harrison asked, his voice taking on the tone of a commanding officer conducting a formal debriefing. "Sir, I'm not sure this is the appropriate venue for that discussion," Sienna said carefully. She was walking a tightrope between military protocol and operational security, trying to satisfy Harrison's curiosity without revealing classified information to people who didn't have the proper clearance levels. The two colonels gathered their materials and filed out of the conference room, leaving Harrison alone with Sienna and the lingering smell of fresh coffee. The door clicked shut with a finality that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet room. Harrison waited until he was certain they were completely alone before continuing his questioning. "Now," he said, settling back in his chair, "what really happened in Syria?" Harrison wasn't just asking random questions about her background. He knew exactly who she was and what she'd been doing before her assignment to Norfolk. The only question was how much he knew about the things that had gone wrong. The hostage extraction mission, sir. 3 American contractors taken by ISIS affiliates. Intel suggested they were being held in a compound outside Aleppo. Harrison nodded. Mission success. All 3 hostages recovered alive. Minimal casualties on our side. He paused, studying her face. But something went wrong after the primary objective was completed. Sienna's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The successful hostage rescue was the part of the mission that had made it into official reports and commendation recommendations. What happened afterward was the part that landed her in a military hospital for 6 weeks and eventually led to her current assignment serving coffee at staff meetings. Secondary explosion, sir. IED concealed in the extraction route. Hit our convoy about 2 clicks from the compound. Your team leader was killed, Harrison said, though it wasn't really a question. Master Chief Rodriguez, along with Petty Officer Jenkins and Petty Officer Walsh. I was the only survivor from the primary assault team. How long were you hospitalized? Harrison asked gently. 6 weeks active treatment, another 2 months of physical therapy. Sienna met his eyes directly. But the doctors cleared me for full operational duty. The assignment here is just temporary until command decides where to place me next. Have you talked to anyone about it professionally? I mean Navy psychologists. Chaplain even tried civilian therapy for a while. They all say the same thing. It's normal grief response for combat veterans. Give it time, stay active. Don't isolate yourself. Eventually the dreams will fade, and I'll be ready to move forward. But you don't feel ready. I don't know, Sienna admitted. Some days I wake up and I'm angry that I'm stuck here handling administrative duties when I should be out there doing the job I was trained for. Other days I think about the responsibility of leading another team, knowing that my decisions could get them killed. And I wonder if I've lost the edge that kept us all alive for so long. What do you want? Harrison asked. Not what the Navy wants, not what the doctors recommend, not what looks good on your service record, but what do you actually want to do? Sienna looked up at him with surprise. Nobody had asked her that question in months. Everyone had been focused on her medical status, her psychological evaluation scores, her fitness for duty assessments, but nobody had simply asked her what she wanted her future to look like. I want to get back to doing the job I'm good at, Sienna said without hesitation. Not because I'm running away from what happened in Syria, but because I know I can still make a difference. The skills are still there. The training is still solid. I just need the right opportunity to prove that I'm ready. Harrison studied her face, looking for any sign of uncertainty or false bravado. What he saw was someone who'd been honest about her limitations, but was ready to move beyond them. What if I told you I might have that opportunity? Harrison said. What kind of opportunity, sir? She asked, keeping her voice steady, despite the surge of hope she felt rising in her throat. Harrison glanced toward the door, making sure they were still alone, then turned back to face her. The operational planning we were discussing before this conversation started. Joint Special Operations classified mission parameters, the kind of work that requires someone with very specific skill sets. I can't give you details here, Harrison continued. The security clearance requirements alone would take weeks to process, but I can tell you that we're looking for experienced operators who can handle complex tactical situations with minimal support structure. People who've proven they can make good decisions under pressure and adapt when things go sideways. Which they always do, Sienna said, and Harrison smiled slightly at her response. Which they always do, he agreed. The question is whether you're ready for that level of responsibility again. Not whether the doctors think you're ready, not whether your evaluation scores suggest you're ready, whether you know deep down that you can handle leading people into situations where your decisions determine whether they come home alive. I'm ready, Sienna said, and for the first time in 18 months, she actually meant it. The assignment would be temporary, initially 60 days, maybe 90, depending on how the operational timeline develops. If everything goes well, it could lead to permanent reassignment to an active special operations unit. If it doesn't go well, he shrugged, you'd probably end up back here serving coffee. Sienna almost smiled at that. After everything she'd been through, the prospect of returning to administrative duty seemed like the least of her concerns. When would it start? That depends on how quickly we can get your security clearances updated and your medical records transferred. A couple of weeks if we push the paperwork through the right channels. There's one more thing, though. The mission parameters require someone who can blend in, operate without obvious military identification, someone who's good at being invisible, like serving coffee at briefings, where nobody pays attention to the staff sergeant in the corner. Exactly like that. Harrison stood up from his chair, extending his hand toward her. Welcome back to operational status, Staff Sergeant Anderson. Thank you, sir. You won't regret this decision. I know I won't. The question is whether Colonels Brooks and Freeman are going to regret underestimating you when they find out what just happened in here. Gentlemen, please take your seats, Harrison said, though his tone suggested this was no longer the same meeting they'd been attending 20 minutes earlier. We need to make some adjustments to our operational planning. Actually, Colonel, the personnel matter is directly related to our operational planning. Staff Sergeant Anderson won't be handling administrative support for this briefing much longer. Colonel Freeman looked confused. Is she being reassigned? Because we're going to need someone to coordinate the logistics for. Staff Sergeant Anderson will be coordinating logistics from an operational planning perspective rather than an administrative support role. Sienna stepped forward slightly, no longer content to remain invisible in the background. With General Harrison's permission, I'd like to clarify my role in the upcoming mission planning. Harrison nodded. Go ahead, Staff Sergeant. My specialty is unconventional warfare and direct action operations. I've completed 16 operational deployments across multiple theaters, including classified missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. My most recent assignment was team leader for a hostage extraction operation that successfully recovered 3 American contractors from an ISIS affiliate compound. What did you observe, Staff Sergeant? Harrison asked. Sienna glanced at the colonels, then back at the general. Several potential security concerns, sir. Nothing that can't be addressed with proper protocol adjustments, but definitely issues that should be reviewed before operational deployment. Colonel Brooks looked like he was beginning to understand just how badly he'd underestimated the quiet woman who'd been refilling his coffee cup. Colonel Freeman was still processing the revelation that their administrative support had actually been evaluating their performance the entire time. 3 weeks later, Sienna Anderson was back where she belonged, not in conference room 7A serving coffee to officers who'd looked through her like she was furniture, but in a tactical operations center in Virginia, leading a team briefing for a mission that would have been impossible without her specific expertise. Colonel Brooks and Colonel Freeman had both requested transfers to other assignments after the Norfolk briefing, claiming they needed new challenges in their career development. Everyone understood this was military diplomacy for being too embarrassed to work with someone they'd so completely underestimated. Harrison had approved their transfers without comment, though Sienna suspected he'd included detailed notes in their performance evaluations about the importance of not making assumptions based on surface appearances. The moment when being underestimated had finally worked in her favor, proving that respect wasn't something you could demand or fake, or it was something you earned by being competent when it mattered regardless of whether anyone was paying attention. 6 months after that morning in conference room 7, Sienna Anderson found herself in another briefing room. But this time the circumstances were completely different. She was sitting at the head of the table in a classified facility outside Washington, D.C., leading a joint task force meeting with representatives from multiple military branches and intelligence agencies. The mission parameters were complex enough to require input from Army Special Forces, Navy SEALs, Air Force, pararescue specialists, and CIA operatives. The kind of multi-service coordination that typically took months to organize and required someone with credibility across different military cultures and operational specialties. She still thought about Rodriguez, Jenkins, and Walsh regularly, but now those memories motivated her rather than paralyzing her. They'd been good operators who trusted her leadership, and honoring their memory meant continuing to be the kind of leader they'd believed her to be. The briefing room door opened, and a young Air Force lieutenant walked in, clearly nervous about attending a meeting with so many senior personnel present. He carried a tablet and a notebook, moving with the careful efficiency of someone trying not to draw unnecessary attention to himself. Sienna watched him set up his materials near the back of the room, recognizing something familiar in his posture and demeanor, the way he positioned himself to observe without being observed, the way he seemed to blend into the background while remaining alert to everything happening around him. After the meeting concluded and the other participants had filed out, Sienna approached the young lieutenant, who was gathering his materials with the same quiet efficiency he'd displayed throughout the briefing. "Lieutenant," she said, and he looked up with surprise. "Yes, ma'am. I noticed you taking notes during the tactical discussion. You had some insights that you didn't share with the group." "Us." The lieutenant looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I'm just here to handle communication support. I didn't think it was appropriate for me to—" Sienna smiled, remembering a conversation she'd had with General Harrison months earlier in a different briefing room. "What's your background, Lieutenant, before this assignment?" "Combat controller, ma'am. 3 deployments, mostly forward air support coordination." He paused. "But this is supposed to be a recovery assignment while I wait for medical clearance to return to operational status." Sienna nodded, understanding completely. "What happened on IEED in Afghanistan? Nothing serious, just some hearing damage and minor TBI. Doctors want to be cautious before clearing me for jump status again. And you're frustrated being stuck in administrative support when you should be doing the job you were trained for." The lieutenant looked at her with surprise. "Yes, ma'am, exactly." Sienna extended her hand toward him. "Staff Sergeant Sienna Anderson. And I think we need to talk." As they shook hands, she noticed something on his wrist, partially concealed by his uniform sleeve. The distinctive outline of a combat controller badge tattoo, the kind that operators got to commemorate completing one of the military's most demanding training programs. Some things Sienna reflected never changed. Talent had a way of revealing itself eventually, regardless of how well people tried to hide it or how much others tried to overlook it. The only question was whether you were smart enough to recognize it when you saw it and wise enough to do something about it when you did. She had a feeling this young lieutenant was about to get the same kind of opportunity she'd been given in Conference Room 7A, the kind that could change everything if he was ready for it.